They broke ground on a Tuesday. I remember because the vibration from the excavators rattled the coffee cup on my porch rail, sloshing a muddy ring onto the wood. Down the hill, where the trees once stood thick and proud, a yellow cat machine was clawing at the soil like it hated the earth. Behind it, a line of orange-vested workers marched across the land, my land, measuring, marking, and grinning like they'd won something. They thought I was gone. Finished. Another relic of the old world swept aside for progress. But I was watching. From that same porch, nestled in the shadow of pine and sycamore, I watched the rise of Oak Summit Phase 3, an HOA-planned paradise of uniform homes, manicured lawns, and soulless sidewalks. 96 of them, they said. Modern, energy-efficient, exclusive yet affordable. The brochures made it sound like Eden. But Eden didn't get built on stolen ground. My name is Elias Granger, the last of the Granger line and the rightful owner of 342 acres in Stillwater Valley. My grandfather cleared the first stone from this land in 1919. My father planted the first cedar fence post in 48. And I spent 40 years walking every ridge and streambed, tending this land like it was kin. Then the county changed the rules. It started quiet, rezoning proposals buried in 80-page agendas. Next came a public domain notice from the council, citing some twisted interpretation of eminent domain. They claimed the 112 acres south of Granger Ridge were underutilized. That's bureaucratic slang for ripe for the taking. The kicker? The same developers lobbying for the rezoning sat on Oak Summit's HOA board. They called it legal. I called it orchestrated theft. They offered market compensation. I told them where to shove it. When the notice became law, I appealed. When the appeal was denied, I considered fighting them in court. But I wasn't naive. I didn't have the kind of money that buys judges, lobbyists, and land commissions. They knew that. They expected me to fold. To die off, maybe. Leave the land and history behind. So I let them think I had. I played the role they wrote for me. The bitter old farmer too broke in to stop progress. I let the weeds climb my fence lines. Sold my tractor. Even skipped the town hall meetings, though every fiber in me screamed to storm the podium. But while they poured concrete, I gathered names. While they paved cul-de-sacs, I pored over land deeds and county archives. While they popped champagne on sales milestones, I followed a paper trail that led me to something far more valuable than a court win. A legal flaw so old and obscure, they hadn't even noticed it. That discovery changed everything. But I kept quiet. Timing was everything. Then came Marlene Trask, Oak Summit HOA president. Tall, polished, and sharp-tongued. She drove a white Lexus, wore sunglasses that cost more than my father's first truck, and had a knack for making everyone feel beneath her. She sent me a letter on thick cardstock. Your remaining property is in visual violation of Oak Summit's community standards. Untrimmed growth, non-harmonious structures, and a visible compost pile violate Section 3B. I laughed for a full minute. Then I tacked the letter to my barn wall like a hunting trophy. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just stepped into the trap. Their trap had been legal, silent, swift, and dressed in policy. Mine would be patient, meticulous. And when it snapped shut, they'd lose more than land. They'd lose control. I sat back in my rocking chair, watching the rooftops multiply like weeds below. They thought they were building a legacy, but they were building it on my soil. And every nail, every poured slab, every sold lot was another step into a pit they didn't even see coming. Let them build, I thought. That was the plan all along. 3 months passed. Oak Summit Phase 3 was no longer a blueprint. It was a living, breathing beast. Stucco homes with faux shutters rose from the dirt like prefab monuments. Street names bloomed on crisp green signs: Juniper Bend, Whispering Grove, Monarch Lane, names that had never belonged to this land. But I kept my silence. Let the rhythm of hammers and saws beat like war drums in the valley. Let Marlene Trask bask in her empire's expansion. She didn't just run the HOA. She was the HOA, head of the Architectural Review Board, treasurer of the Development Oversight Committee and self-appointed neighborhood ambassador. She held the leash, and she made sure everyone knew it. The first families moved in before Christmas. Young professionals with bright smiles and deep mortgages. Retirees seeking quiet mountain charm. They waved at me when they passed the old Granger place, not realizing the irony. They thought I was the outlier, the holdover. They didn't know they were living in my backyard. And still, I waited, because the trap had to be perfect. Not just legally sound, undeniable. I'd hired a team of legal bloodhounds months earlier. Land use attorneys, title researchers, the kind of people who knew how to find ghosts in government archives. And they found one. In a dusty corner of the county recorder's office sat a 1931 land grant, signed in faded ink by a judge long dead. My grandfather, Samuel Granger, had negotiated it after a flood shifted the valley's irrigation path. The new grant redefined the property lines, but more importantly, it contained a clause, a single paragraph buried in dense legalese. Any structure erected within the designated boundaries, if built following a zoning change enacted without the written consent of the deed holder or his descendants, shall be considered encroachment, and full rights revert to said deed holder upon claim. It was legal gold, because that zoning change, the one that let them seize 112 acres without my signature, that was their fatal error. Still, I didn't strike. Not yet. Instead, I visited the county GIS office and requested an official boundary overlay. When the technician lined up the old plot with the new development, he blinked hard, then checked it again. Looks like their whole phase falls inside your grandfather's boundary line, he mumbled. Imagine that, I said, deadpan. He printed the map. I tipped him $10 and walked out holding the future in my hands. Phase 3 wasn't just sitting on my land. It was my land. They'd built 96 homes, a clubhouse, walking trails, and 2 retention ponds, without legally securing the title. They thought eminent domain had scrubbed me out. But eminent domain only works when the paperwork's clean. And theirs was a mess. Back home, I pinned the map beside Marlene's visual violation letter. A nice pairing. I could already hear the panic in her voice when she found out. But I needed more than a legal ace. I needed leverage. So I waited until the final property sold. The minute the ink dried on the last deed, my team filed a quiet title action in circuit court. That single motion set off a chain reaction like dry brush meeting flame. Within days, notices went out to every Phase 3 homeowner. A claim has been filed disputing land ownership under your residence. Please contact legal counsel immediately. Phones exploded. Emails ricocheted. The HOA scrambled to assemble emergency meetings. And Marlene? She drove that white Lexus straight up my gravel driveway and stomped out in stilettos. This is harassment, she snapped. You won't get away with it. I handed her a copy of the land grant. I'm not trying to get away with anything. I'm just taking back what was mine. She scanned the document, eyes twitching left to right. Then she laughed, too loud, too forced. This won't hold up, she hissed. But the fear in her eyes said otherwise. As she turned to leave, I added, You know, Marlene, you sent me a letter once. About visual harmony. She froze. I think it's only fair we revisit that concept. Harmony. Balance. No reply. Just the sound of her heels clicking down the steps. I shut the door behind her, locking it with a quiet satisfaction. I had planted the seed of doubt, and it would spread like kudzu. The homes were built. The money spent. The families moved in. And now they were mine to uproot. By the first thaw of spring, panic had seeped into every corner of Oak Summit Phase 3. The once peaceful cul-de-sacs now hummed with whispered speculation and late-night lawyer calls. Porch lights flicked on and off like warning beacons as neighbors huddled behind closed doors, poring over unfamiliar legal terms like clouded title and reversionary interest. The HOA board tried to smother the blaze with reassurances. It's a clerical issue, they said. Just a misunderstanding. But fear spreads faster than facts, and the residents were beginning to see past the curtain. They weren't standing on safe ground. They were standing on mine. I stayed silent, letting the legal machinery grind forward. My attorneys filed the full title claim backed by a chain of ownership evidence going back 94 years. We had maps, deeds, county memos, and one glorious notarized affidavit from a long-retired zoning clerk who remembered the skipped signature. The court's initial response was swift, a temporary injunction on all Phase 3 properties. No sales, no renovations, no financing. Every asset was frozen pending resolution of the title dispute. For homeowners, it was like watching their foundation turn to sand. But I wasn't after panic. I wanted position. And I had it. At the center of the storm, Marlene Trask was unraveling. Gone was the pristine HOA president with a spotless, white Lexus and smug confidence. In her place stood a woman sleep-deprived, cornered, and furious. She called a community address in the clubhouse. Packed with residents, legal advisors, and reporters, it was supposed to be a show of strength. It turned into a public unraveling. "The claim is baseless," Marlene declared, gripping the podium with whitening knuckles. "Mr. Granger is a bitter old man trying to extort us." A man in the second row stood. "Is it true the land deeds were never verified against the original survey maps?" Marlene hesitated. A second homeowner asked, "Why didn't we know about the zoning discrepancy before we closed?" Then a third, "If we're not legal owners, what happens to our mortgages?" The room spiraled. Voices rose. Faces flushed. I watched from the back row, arms crossed, silent. Then I stepped forward. The room fell quiet. "I didn't take your homes," I said calmly. "They built them on my soil without asking. I'm just asking back what's mine." Gasps. Murmurs. One woman broke down in tears. Marlene lunged for the mic. "Don't listen to him. He's bluffing." I held up the document. The original 1931 land grant, laminated and framed for dramatic effect. "I'm not bluffing. I'm offering options." You could hear a pin drop. I continued. "You have two choices. Fight a years-long court battle while your properties lose value, or work with me. Quiet title transfer, 99-year ground leases, $1 per year. All you lose is HOA control." Marlene stared at me like I'd just cursed in church. "You dismantle our governance over your ego?" "No," I replied. "Over your arrogance." I walked out as the crowd erupted behind me, half in anger, half in hope. I tossed a grenade into their orderly world, but I also handed them a parachute. It wasn't about money. I had enough. This was about respect, about legacy, about watching the very people who tried to erase me now asking for my permission to stay. Back at the farmhouse, I poured a glass of bourbon and sat on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the rows of rooftops. I imagined each home as a rook in a game they thought they were winning. But the board was mine. And the final move? That would come soon. 3 weeks later, the signatures began to roll in. It started with a retired couple from Monarch Lane. Then a young family from Whispering Grove. Then another. And another. One by one, the homeowners signed the 99-year ground lease agreements. They gave up their HOA privileges in exchange for peace, security, and legal protection from the storm Marlene had dragged them into. They didn't sign because they trusted me. They signed because I was the only one still standing on solid ground. The court date never came. By the time the judge was set to hear the title dispute, 78 of the 96 homeowners had voluntarily recognized my ownership and agreed to the lease terms. My attorneys withdrew the action, citing satisfactory settlement. The judge nodded. Case dismissed. But not for Marlene. She refused to sign. Even as her neighbors made peace and moved on, she clung to her illusion of control like a drowning woman gripping a stone. She called emergency HOA meetings that no one attended, sent emails no one opened. The board dwindled down to her and a treasurer who quietly resigned 2 days later. Then came the foreclosure. Turns out, her property had been collateral for a personal loan she took out to upgrade community infrastructure. Without legal ownership of the land beneath her home, the lender called it in. No equity, no recourse, just a cold, clinical seizure of assets. The white Lexus disappeared first. Then the furniture. Then the woman herself. I watched from my porch as the moving truck hauled away the last box. No goodbye. No fanfare. Just silence. And in that silence, something settled. Justice, maybe. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because what I'd built in place of Oak Summit's brittle hierarchy was something far more enduring. Community. With the HOA dissolved, residents turned to one another. Potlucks replaced board meetings. Neighbors fixed fences and shared tools instead of citations and fines. The neighborhood stopped being a curated product and started becoming a living thing, messy, imperfect, real. And they welcomed me in. The bitter old man on the hill became something else. Mentor, mediator, historian. Kids came up to pet my dogs. Teens asked to help on the farm. I started bringing eggs down every Sunday and stayed for coffee more often than not. One evening, as the sun spilled gold over the ridgeline, a man named Javier, single father, 2 daughters, stood beside me at the fence line. "You know," he said, "you could have kicked us all out." "I could have," I said. "Why didn't you?" I looked over the homes, no longer strangers to me. Because power isn't about taking. It's about choosing when not to. He nodded. Marlene never understood that. "No," I said. "She didn't." He hesitated. "So, what happens after the 99 years?" I smiled. "That'll be for the next Granger to decide." He raised a brow. "There a next Granger?" "Not yet," I said. "But I've got time." He laughed. "Well, let us know when you find one. We'll throw them a barbecue." As the seasons changed, so did the land. Trees returned to the outer borders, planted by volunteer crews. The retention ponds were stocked with fish. A walking trail was built, not paved, just cleared and honest, winding from the edge of the Granger homestead through what was once Phase 3. They named it Granger Way. No plaques. No speeches. Just a dirt path that remembered where it came from. And me? I stayed in my rocking chair, on the same porch where it all began. Coffee in the mornings. Bourbon in the evenings. The land was quiet again, not empty, just calm. They'd thought they'd buried me under concrete and contracts. But it turned out they built their kingdom on my roots. And roots? They don't forget.